All right, Eric, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. Just to give everybody a quick little bit of background on you, we've known each other since kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Yeah.
been friends, been together, lived together our senior years of high school, and played sports together and all that stuff. So we have a long history together, but also joined the military together for the most part. I went in first, and then you followed suit, and you stayed in and have done some amazing things. And just recently retired after 20 years in the Special Forces in the Marine Corps. So I think one, just the fact that we've been friends forever, it allows us to have conversations that a lot of people probably won't have. But also the fact that we served in the Marine Corps, not together, but along the same lines of service. So I thought it'd be fun to have you on and talk about the things that you've learned in 20 years of serving in the military at the highest level, and then now transitioning out and getting more into the mental health side of things and helping people with the transition process. So thanks for coming on the show, man.
Hey, brother, I appreciate you having me. I think, this has been like 30 years in the making, this conversation right here, something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, long time. And the funny thing is like where we were in elementary school, and then seeing where we were in high school, and then seeing where we are now. I think me and you both would agree that like we probably would have never envisioned these are the type of people we would turn out to be, and this is the life that we have.
Yeah. I mean, I think joining the military is probably the best thing for both of us.
Yeah, 100%.
Uh,
100%, man. It was
yeah, no,
I
I
always tell
appreciate it,
people
man.
that.
I'm looking forward to this. This will be good.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I always tell people like if you don't really have structure, if you don't really have a direction of what you want to do in life, the military is a great way to figure that out. One, if you hate it, you'll spend 4 years trying to think about what you want to do to get out and like make something of yourself. But then if you love it, it gives you a community and a sense of camaraderie that you're never going to be able to replace. Even within 4 years, you get that same sense of friendship and camaraderie that is really almost impossible to replace. And I think that is why a lot of people do struggle once they get out, is trying to find that same community of those people that have your back no matter what.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the military, I mean, right? Like it's an organization that has one mission, that everyone gets behind, and you come to that for that thing, whatever that is. And so you can't replicate that, and, when you spend 20 years doing something that you believe in, right? When you stop doing that, you have a sense of loss, that purpose, you spend it trying to find new purpose. But yeah, the military is an interesting organization in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even within the 4 years that I served, I still had that same sense of loss when I got out. And, that's why I joined like a powerlifting community, and then I joined a jiu-jitsu community. And you're constantly trying to like find that missing piece. And
Yeah.
eventually for me, it came down to the fact of like accepting that you're never going to find that, and just kind of being like, you got to be okay with it, or else you can go down a very dark path of like never being fulfilled and happy in life, because you're constantly trying to find friends that will replace the other ones. And it's just an impossible thing to do, because you're not going to a war, you're not serving, you're not around each other 24/7, living together, like sharing all these experiences. So for me, it was mostly about like accepting that these communities are great, but it's never going to be the same. And I have to be okay with that, or else I'm going to suffer, for the rest of my life.
Yeah. No, I mean, man, there's so much that you can unpack with what you just said, but you're right. You can't replicate it because it's something, it just goes back to, I mean, you're a combat veteran, like you're in those survival situations, right? And like
Mhm.
just the primalness of, having to watch each other's back out of survival. that you build connections in times like that you can't replicate, anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's also a great, just like sports, like you have to learn how to work with people that you never would work with. Like you never would choose to work with these people. They come from such diverse backgrounds and they have their set of values and core beliefs that they were raised on and you have yours, and yet you have to make it work. You have to find a way to make it work. You have to find a way to get the best out of people, and you have to find a way to get the best out of yourself too, right? You have to away all your biases. You have to put away all your prejudices and everything, and you have to make it work because you have to trust them and they have to trust you. And without that, you're going to have a fractured team the entire time. And talk about like a scary situation when you can't trust the people you're going into combat with.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think it happens kind of naturally in the military, especially in the special operations community. That team building, like you mentioned. I mean, I spent more years with my team, or more time with my team than I did my own family for years, and so I knew them, you know, oftentimes better than they knew themselves,
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that team building, from an organizational perspective, looking at it, in the civilian world is like, there's just that unifying mission and values and ethos that everybody is drawn to, whatever service that is. And so they come to it looking for that, and then it's just unique in how everyone just goes towards the same, you know, objective, right? We get pounded at, in boot camp, it's pounded into our head, mission accomplishment, and, all those good things. So, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of psychology behind, the military approach to building. I hope that they put that effort into it. But it works, right?
It definitely works. Yeah. I think there's something about like the environment that you're in, right? Like going to Paris Island in South Carolina, right? Like it has this mystique to it that like this is where you're gonna train. Like you're going there, the whole process of like getting on the bus and they strip you down, they cut your hair, so you all look alike. Um, Nothing about your previous 18 years of life exist anymore, and you all have the same uniform on, you all have the same haircut, you all look the same. They teach you that you all bleed green, right? Like we
Mhm.
all bleed the same. And they spend 3 months of almost, you would say, brainwashing you in a sense. But yeah, they do such a good job of like isolating you and even creating a, even within the dynamics of like boot camp, they do a good job of like starting to create a us versus them mentality as well. Like we had our unit and then you had the other unit and you guys were kind of competing against each other for like who was the cleanest unit, who was the best unit. So they give you this responsibility that like we as a unit are looked at, not as an individual. It's not like the individual person there anymore. It's like the weakest link is the one that's going to be looked at as the face of your unit. So how can you get them to step up to be the best? Like how, so they start that at such an early process of like, how can we get the best out of each other? And I think by isolating us in those areas where you just don't really see anything else, I think that has a good premise around it as well. And they did the same thing with special forces too, where they put all of us in the bay, and it was like it's like a 20-minute drive to get to like the actual base around other Marines. So they always do this great job of like isolating you to feel like this is all I have around me. So now I have to make it work. Whereas like if we were connected to other places, if we were connected to civilians more, then we would maybe not have such a camaraderie of like these are the only people that I have, so I have to make it work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and boot camp they tear you down to build you up back up for a purpose. Like you come there as an individual and leave as a Marine, as corny as that sound, but they do have that, you know, that we mentality. We are a team now. Um, And even in special operations and anything in the military, right? Like you have to rely on others. There's nothing that you can do by yourself within the DoD's mission set, right? And so that the teamwork and how you build teams in the military is, yeah, it's something special.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just kind of building on that idea, right? Especially when it comes to combat leadership positions, right? Because that's the next step, right? Like you can build teams um, on the mainland, and it's one thing to build like a motor unit team and a logistics team and a this team, but it's a different beast when you're building a combat ready team. And you did 7 combat tours within your 20 years. So what are some of the key like leadership principles that you picked up at a young age that you've seen from the people, and then what are some things that you developed once you got into those leadership positions that were key in order for you to build the camaraderie, the team, the buy-in?
Hmm. Yeah, and I love leadership, man. If I could spend any time studying anything, it'd be leadership. It's so funny because there's like no one can define leadership. I mean, there are definitions out there. There's a million and one different definitions of it, but no one can definitively say what leadership is. And in my opinion, you know, I mean, leadership is leadership. Whether it's combat leadership or leading a nonprofit organization, whatever it is, all the principles are the same. I mean, there might be some different skills and approaches that vary depending on the environment you're in. Like combat, for example, right? Like decisiveness is definitely something that you have to have. Especially when there's people's lives on the line. Um, but I recall, growing up, I always tell this story when I had this conversation. I had a senior gunny. This was out when I was in recon, third recon, and I mean, you know how the military is very rank structured, and but he was not like that, and he was. We ended up calling him Big Daddy, was his nickname. Uh, but you could tell that he genuinely cared about us, and he was always pleasant to be around. He'd come in like, "What's up, suckerfish? How you doing?" And E7 talking to E3 at the time. And I just think that authenticity and like knowing that he genuinely cared about our well-being and development, was, I didn't realize it at the time, but like it was a huge leadership lesson for me, just based on how I responded to that. Like I looked up to that guy, and the era that we grew up in, it was very Marine Corps, like, hey, you will do what I tell you to do because I told you to do it, no
Mm-hmm.
questions asked, um, or else, right? And with him, we never had a fear of reprisal. It was always a fear of disappointing him or letting him down, and so I think that was a much more effective motivator for me personally, um, than having some guy yelling at me, and so as I grew up, I started to kind of take that approach. And when I was a team chief for MARSOC, and I made it a focus of mine, to have that style of leadership to where it's more like a big brother, like you care for them, you're looking out for them. They know that. They also know that if you mess up, you're going to put them in their place, and there's always a balance to that. But I find that that's where that true loyalty is going to come from. Like in leadership in general, no one's going to follow you if they if they think you're just a jerk and you don't have their best interest in mind. They're not going to follow you regardless. In that case, you're not leading anything, but you might be a supervisor by
Yeah.
title or whatever. But yeah, and yeah. So I personally, I've been trying to develop this theory of inherent leadership, and I think leadership is leadership, and I think it's one of those human things that's inherent to all of us, um, like love, right? And so I said, I was talking about the definitions of leadership earlier. Well, if I were to ask you, how do you define love? You could probably give me a definition of it, but yours is probably going to vary, in meaning and how you describe it than a whole bunch of other people. And I think leadership's, you know, pretty much the same.
Mhm.
Everyone is capable of it. It's an inherent ability of humans, right? But how and what that looks like, I think varies.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the interesting thing about the military is that you're going to be put in a position of leadership eventually, right? Like that's one of the things about the military, love it or hate it, that if you stay in long enough, you're going to get promoted, you're going to be put in charge of people, and you kind of have to figure it out. Like I know they do NCO courses, and they do leadership courses as well, but a lot of it is kind of just figuring it out as you go, and you learn from the people that you get to. But there's also a lot of people who get promoted in these positions that aren't good. They lack like the leadership qualities. Um, but the thing that the military does is that they put this fear in you that whoever's in charge, you have to follow. But they, like you said, there's a big difference between following somebody because you have to and following somebody because you want to.
Hmm.
And it sounds like for you, the biggest driver of wanting to follow somebody is knowing that they care about you and that they're going to have your back and they're going to take care of you, um, and they're going to respect your opinion. How do you cultivate an environment to make people feel comfortable being around you, ask questions, push back? I feel like the best leaders are the ones that accept pushback, intelligent pushback from other people, as opposed to we've all seen people that were like, I'm the leader. This is what I say. Everyone does it. No questions asked. How have you gone about cultivating a community of people that feel like their opinion matters, feels like that you love them? How have you done that?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. uh, Funny enough, I just call that my be a good human approach, right? Like, and I will, before I start on that, I will say the military is good at developing leaders. I mean, obviously, most of corporate America takes leadership principles from the military.
Yeah.
Simon Sinek and servant leadership and all that stuff. That's he got that from the military, right? Leaders eat last. It's something that we all heard
Yep.
and do in the military. But yeah, I look at, to answer your question, you look back to like, tribes. And so what, like in early humanity, what did leadership look like? And that was really, who was the best hunter in that tribe, right? And that person led the hunting party to make sure that they can go get food, or who knew where the next water source was. Everybody followed that person to the water source. And so it was, much more out of survival for the group, right? And the best interest of the group. And I think you still see that now in how we define leadership, right? It's like inspiring action, to achieve a common goal, something along those lines of a definition for leadership. Um, but I think again, going back to that, inherent leadership there, like we are all humans and we all have these, needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you're going to follow somebody who is meeting those things, who you believe is going to meet those needs for you and whatever group that you exist in, right? And so just being conscious of the human dynamic first is probably the first step. Like everybody is an individual that is choosing to be part of this group. In the military, not so much choice, but uh, you're choosing to be part of this group, and having the best interest of the group in mind is where I always start. you
Mhm.
know and that's not to say that there's not going to be times where you have to do things that they're not going to like. Leadership is also about being able to make those hard decisions. But sometimes those hard decisions, they should always be made with the best interest of the group in mind.
Yeah. No, I agree. But being the person that decides what that best interest is, um, could also rub people the wrong way sometimes, right? Because maybe the best interest of the group is not the best interest for a handful of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that balance of uh, the best interest of the group, but also understanding that you're dealing with individual people with their own individual emotions, their own individual responses of how they're going to feel about the best interests of the group? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think just my natural personality, but that the approach I've taken is a very democratic leadership style in that sense. I value everyone's feedback. If it is a major decision, then I'm gonna engage with people. Hey, what do you think about this? How does this impact you? And if it comes to a point where I have to make a decision, then just have an open conversation with them. Like, hey, I know Tony, I know that this is going to affect you in this way, but here's the reason why we have to make this decision. And I think that the fact that you acknowledge that their needs, and then explain to them why you have to make this decision, I think people are a lot more willing to accept that than just the hey, you're going to do it because I said so.
Yeah, I think for me, the people that I look up to from a leadership perspective can always kind of give you a definition of why you're doing the things that you're doing so that you understand better, right? The poor leaders are the ones that say, this is what we're doing, no questions asked. We're doing it because I said we're doing it, as opposed to this this is why we're doing this decision. It's going to lead to X, Y, and Z down the road, and that creates this buy-in. But a big part of that is also dissolving your ego, right? Because there's in leadership positions, there's a lot of ego that goes with that as well, because you are now in charge. You do have the final say. So how have you gone about separating your ego that's telling you your decision's the best decision versus being like, I got to put my ego aside and I'm going to listen to what these guys have to say, and then we're going to formulate the best decision, and not think that that makes me look lesser of a person? Because a lot of people think that. A lot of people think, if I'm asking you for your opinion and I'm supposed to be in charge, maybe you're not going to think the same of me. I should have all the answers. And I think the best leaders know that they don't have all the answers, and that the team around you that you've built is like, if you've done a great job building a team, you should respect their opinions because you've built them. And they're going to see things so much differently than you. So it's important to have that. How have you put aside your ego to allow yourself to do that? Or is there some things that you've learned along the way that allowed you to do that?
Yeah, I was going to say, you did bring up a good point that a lot of people think that leaders have to be the smartest in the room and the most experienced and all that stuff, and it's just a fallacy. But the short answer is humility. Like, you have to understand that no one knows everything. It's impossible, right? And so, being able to leverage the different backgrounds and diversity of the team, that's the strength of a good leader. But also self-reflection, like knowing where you are strong as a person, as a leader, you know, is also going to help you know where you need to ask for advice. If I'm not knowledgeable or strong in a certain area, I would much rather ask someone to get the right answer than make a call and it be a bad one, and it negatively impact the team somehow. And so, yeah, ego is a funny thing, but I think there's a lot of personality involved in that, but it's really self reflection and just humility, um, and again, keeping like what's best for this team in mind. Ego obviously gets in the way of that, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you open that door and you do get some people on a team that are pretty dumb sometimes, and you're just like, man, like,
Yeah.
this guy's gonna give me an answer, and it's gonna be a very dumb answer, but I got to make him feel like he's not dumb while he's giving me this answer.
Yeah. Yeah. There is that for sure, man.
But
So I think,
humility is something that um, I think for me the thing that taught me the most about humility was like jujitsu and learning to learning to understand that no matter how big or small, no matter what their sex is, there's people out there that can kill you. They can beat you up, they can choke you out, and they
oh
can
yeah.
kill you, right?
Yep.
And there's always, no matter how good you get, there's always somebody out there that can do that.
Yeah.
And to me, it was like going through that and doing that for 7 years. I was like, man, like this is dangerous. Like it's dangerous to be not able to defend yourself. And then that also taught me this idea that like if there's people out there that can choke you out, that can kill you, there's also going to be people out there that know more than you, that have a story to tell, that have some positive impact, input. And that's the way I approach like every conversation I have, regardless of intelligence, regardless of anything. It's like this person has a life, this person has a story, and it's my job to find them interesting to talk to, because every life is interesting, but it's up to you to kind of like pull that out of them sometimes, right? And I'm sure you've had to do the same thing where like there are, you know, people that have been in the military for a year coming out of high school, and you got to work with them in your team. How do you pull out the best of them when in reality they don't really have anything they can actually contribute, because they are just 18, 19 years old, you
Yeah.
know? So how have you found to be the best way to like pull those things out of people to get the best out of them? Is it challenging them physically so that can overcome things that they didn't think they could overcome? Is it challenging them intellectually? Is it just kind of allowing them to figure it out and mature? Like, what have you done? What have you seen to be the best ways to like pull the best out of someone?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, luckily, in MARSOC and the special operations community, we don't have any young like 18, 19 off the street. You've got to do some time, and then you go through a year plus of training and stuff. So by the time they get to us, they've got to one, they already have experience in the military, but they've got a lot of training as well. But that's not to say like our new guys, right? They're on a team for the very first time. You know, baby raiders is what we call them. They don't have a clue about, what they just got themselves into. Um, but I think everyone has, something to contribute. Even that young guy that doesn't have a clue. What I found that those guys have is a perspective that's not tainted by experience and organization. And so those guys are, especially nowadays, this generation is a lot more curious and needs to know why a lot more than I think we ever did. But I loved it because, we would go into mission planning or doing some, whatever it was. And I encouraged people to ask why and, speak their mind. It was very democratic, like I said. But I loved when they would say, "Why do we do it this way?" Because it forced me to explain it and reason through it. And then sometimes I'm like, "That is a good question. I don't know why we do it this way, man. This is stupid." And they might have a completely different idea or perspective that might work better. And so I think being open to those things, being open to change, that's where innovation really happens.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then when it comes to like cultivating a team culture, because you're in charge of a team, um, so typically you become part of a team, so you learn how to serve within the team, and then you work your way up to be the team leader, which is in charge of about 5, 6 people. And then you continue to work your way up to where you're in charge of a platoon, which is about, in special forces, about 20 to 30, depending. And then you can be in charge of, 100 people. Um, is there a difference between cultivating a good culture in a team of five versus like a team of 100, or are the principles the same, and kind of what are those principles?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the principles are the same. And to backtrack a little to answer your other question, when you asked about how do you develop those people, it depends, right? There's a famous quote, it depends, but it's individually based, right? So if somebody is, very much into their physical fitness, or is struggling with their physical fitness, that's where you say, hey, I'm challenging you, like, let's go PT, let's go do something. Or if they're the intellectual type and that's what stimulation they need, like, it just depends on the person, and how you challenge them is individualized, and the military does do a good job about developing, leaders, and those that you work for. But I think, to your most recent question, that the same thing applies at an organizational level. You might not have as much direct influence on that, but you can, once you get to that level where you're in charge of 100 plus people, you know, you do establish that culture, right? And then you have those expectations out of your subordinate leaders, if you will. I hate the word subordinate. Um, but that culture starts with the leader, no matter what level it is. And so, again, to me, it's the good human theory, right? Is like, you have to have that sense of responsibility at no matter what level you're at. People are going to choose to follow you because there's a certain amount of self-interest in this, right? As a follower, right? I want somebody who can, give me development, whether that be professionally, personally, whatever that might be. Um, and so you just have to be conscious of those things and how you set the culture, and um, manage as well, manage the culture, because discipline is another issue that that comes with leadership.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one thing you touched on that resonated with me, in the beginning, was you don't want to your the gunny that you worked for, you didn't want to disappoint him. And then once you get into that leadership position, I feel like that same disappointment is what drives you to be a good leader as well. Like, as I have my own lab, as I'm mentoring undergraduates and stuff like that, my biggest thing is like, I don't want them to think that I failed them, like I didn't prepare them, that I didn't put in the effort, right? Like, so I think that is a personality trait that good leaders have, is they don't want to let the other people down, as opposed to self-serving their own ego of, like, constantly trying to stroke it. It's like, I don't want these guys to think that I'm not a good leader, that I'm not putting forth the effort. So I think there is that common driving factor for people of, like, yeah, being a good human means you don't want to disappoint the other people around you. You want to make sure that they feel like you're giving them their best foot forward as well. So I
Yeah.
just
But
wanted
the
to touch.
ego piece to that's huge too, man, because like you have to realize as a leader that it's no longer about you, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, like, be proud of, what you've accomplished, or the fact that these people have chosen to lead you, but you have to realize the reason they've chosen for you to lead them is because they think you're the best person that is going to get them to success, whatever that is, how they define that. So, I think that it's just a realization that it's not about me at all. It's
Mhm.
about what I, as the leader, can do for them, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's manifested a lot in the military. I think when you get into civilian organizations, I've noticed this even in academia, where you'll get these people that, they get their doctorate and they think that now that I have this, doctor is earned. Like, that's my title. You have
Mm,
to respect that title. But the best ones that I've seen are the ones that are like, you can call me whatever you want. Like you can call me
Mhm.
my name, you can call me doctor. It doesn't really matter to me. Um, I just want to make sure that every day I wake up that I'm able to serve you as opposed to you serving me, and that
Mhm.
I have to earn your respect each day. Like each day is a new day to earn someone's respect. It's like I always think of it as like what I did yesterday doesn't matter, you know? So yeah, if I did something bad, doesn't matter. If I did something good, doesn't matter. Today is the new day that I have to earn that respect all over again. It's not like I
Mhm.
get to build up all this equity and then just be like a shitty person for the next 6 months. It's like every day
Yeah.
is a new day to earn something, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's that humility thing too. And an importance of humility is because it does keep you hungry. It does keep you driving to get better, and doctor or, general, I don't believe in the term expert in anything because that implies that you know everything about that subject and it's not possible, right? But you should have that drive to continue learning, and I'm naturally inquisitive person. Learner is one of my top strengths if you follow Gallup and all that stuff. um, but I think that you know desire to learn and it's openness is was beneficial to me also as a leader.
Yeah. Do you guys do anything like that with like personality testing or anything like that in the military to kind of figure out how to best serve different personalities? Or is that something you kind of just build kind of like a plethora of, and then you can kind of learn as you go? Do you guys do any personality testing or anything like that?
Yes, I wish we would use it more at the team level. Where it's most prevalent is in our assessment and selection. So, they go through a lot of psychological testing and, you know, personalities. They're all of that stuff is captured throughout the entire process that they're going through. You have to, get assessed and selected that says, hey, this is the right type of person that we want to join the organization. And then you go through all of your training, and you're under the microscope the entire time, right? And so, like by the time you get out of that, they have a very good idea that this is the type of personality person that we're looking for. We assess on certain traits that we've identified, that lend well for guys doing this job, or gals, and you know I wish though that we would incorporate that more at the team level, and that's structured wise. A lot of different, as a leader, which is good, you have room to do, make your own choices and how you lead. Um, but I think when building teams, having that understanding of personalities and who has what strengths and weaknesses, and where can I put this person with this strength to make up for this weakness here, like I think that's the art of team building.
Yeah, it is an art. It's not so much a formula or an equation. It's definitely an art to put those right team together and to get the best out of everyone. When it comes to like mental health in the military and dealing with that um, on a personal level, how has that been something that you've dealt with? Do they provide resources? Do they provide? How has that been over the scope of 20 years of serving?
Yeah, I mean, I still deal with it, honestly. I'll say it's gotten a lot better. Um, Early on in my career, the culture that we had, I mean, and it was during the height of the war, right? Like you just had to do, you just had to go to war. You had to do what the nation needed. And it was just, we were constantly deploying. And we had services, but the culture at the time was, if you go to the BAS, if you go to medical, you're seen as weak,
Yeah.
right? Like it was a very machismo, tough guy culture, and it has to be, at a certain level. And so a lot of guys never went. I mean, we had knee problems and all the problems we got now, and we just never got them taken care of because we didn't want to be seen as weak. But that's the same thing with the mental health issues. Guys never got sought help because they saw it as weakness, or their ego got in the way, and I don't need help. I survived all these crazy things in combat. Like if I can survive that, I can survive anything. But I will say now, and especially in SOCOM, they're DoD wide. Apologies, DoD wide. It's become um, a priority overall, and SOCOM has done a phenomenal job with the resources and things that they've put together for that. And so we have, command psychologists. We have a POTF team, which is the preservation of the force, right? And so that's, physical. We have physical trainers, we have dietitians, we have, mental health counselors. We have all these different things, and it's the mind, body, spirit approach. But even still, right, a lot of guys, there's a stigma against going to that, right? Because I don't want them to think something's wrong with me, and then it'll disqualify me from going on the next deployment, or, um, you know. And so I hope that we normalize help. Normalize, hey, it is okay to get help. The things that you're going to experience in this job, you need to get help, right? Uh, in my own experience, I mean, I still deal with depression and some issues of PTSD and stuff, which is funny because when I was younger, I was like, man, PTSD is not real. This
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
or I'd see all these crazy Vietnam veterans out on the street, talking to themselves, and eventually I'm like, man, I get it. I totally get it. I have sympathy for those guys that weren't afforded the help back then. Um, but the other thing is, I went through years and years of not even knowing that I needed help.
Yeah.
It had just become, you're so busy, you're always deploying. It's, you're just in survival mode a lot of times. Um, and you just grown accustomed to, well, this is the way it is. Um, and then, at a certain point in my life, I realized like, I'm not happy. I'm not the same. I don't enjoy doing anything I ever did before, like this isn't me. And so I finally did get help, and man, I still do. Um, but it is, a lot of guys just don't know that they need it, and so, the buddy check rule, right? It's always something, reach out to a guy. Hey, how you doing? Check in on them. We watch each other's back in combat. We have to make that a culture that we do when we get home as well.
Yeah, and I've read some research on stress resiliency in the military, and uh, a lot of places or a lot of research now is looking at ways to assess mental health pre-deployment and then reassess it post-deployment to see kind of what's going on with brain scans, but also with questionnaires and interviews and stuff like that. And I would have to imagine that that's going to become more and more prevalent. This idea that we have to put a lot of, not only do we have to focus on physical training and tactical training, but we also need to focus on like how can we make them as mentally resilient as possible, and not resilient in a way to where they're emotionless, but resilient in a way to where they can handle the things to the best of their ability to, think about cognitive reappraisal, think about ways to reshape and perception and stress and stuff like that. Is that
Yeah.
something that you guys focus on without,
Cool.
how do, so I guess my first question is, how do you focus on that without overstepping your boundaries as a non-clinical psychologist, right? How do you implement that yourself with your guys?
Yeah. One, we do, like I said, we have a lot of programs. We have staffs of clinical psychologists. We also have, before you deploy, you have a baseline, so they scan your brain. That you do all these different cognitive tests, and they get your baseline. And then when you return from a deployment, you do it again. And there's just all these checks throughout, and so they can see, the the difference in the baseline and monitor that. But I think a lot of it's just going back to just talking to the people, right, and knowing your people. What what is this person's baseline? And on the mental health side of things is like you should know your people well enough that if Tony comes into the team room one day and he's normally a happy-go-lucky guy and cutting up and doing all this stuff, and he's kind of just tucked in the corner. Obviously, something's up, So just talk to him, like, "Hey, man, what is going on?" But as far as like development and the cognitive stuff you're talking about, Kim's games, the keep in mind, all those things that keep you sharp, um, are obviously things that you can do without, having a PhD in
Yeah.
psychology, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, it's how it is. You always try and keep yourself as sharp as possible, and as a leader, you now have the responsibility to do that for your team as well.
Yeah. And so do you guys do like team building activities outside of military related stuff? Do you do like barbecues? Are you like aware of trying to facilitate um, bringing in the families, bringing in everyone, and just trying to keep everyone together outside to build that, to get that social aspect of mental
Mhm.
health as well?
Yeah, I think that's more crucial than anything.
Yeah.
uh, for mental health too, right? Humans are social creatures. We need that, socialization. But in terms of building a team, like that's where a strong team really matters. And that, when I was a team chief, that was what I focused on for the most part, was making sure that our team, is a close knit unit, right? Like we have those interpersonal relationships with each other. We have that connection that can withstand all the trials and issues that we're going to face throughout training and on deployment. Um, the tactics and those certain skills, those are things that are all, learnable through training, etc. But that human dynamic, those relationships, that's something that, has to be purposely built. And so we did, yeah, always had family barbecues. Like I wanted my team to be an extension of my family. Like we are a family, and that's the approach that I always took.
And now with that being said, right, you can see the positives of that while serving, but then you can also see how once they transition out and they get out and that's gone, how that can be detrimental, right?
Oh yeah.
So how have they, based on what you just transitioned out of, like how have they done a better job of transitioning people out of the military? Because what you're saying now, like we didn't do any of that back in 2004. I was in from 2004 to 2008. We didn't do any mental health training. We didn't do any brain scans. We didn't do any of that stuff. They didn't have nutritionists. They didn't have psych teams. They didn't have any of that. And then when I got out, it was like my team deployed again. I had to get my shoulder scope from the first deployment, so I didn't get to deploy. So I was like by myself. Everyone was gone. So I was already like, man, this sucks already. And now I'm
Yeah.
like getting out and moving back to Florida, and then you lose everything. And that was so difficult to deal with. So are they doing anything different? Are they doing anything better to help people transition out of the military to deal with that aspect? Because yeah, like you said, you spend so much time trying to build this family, and then they're gone. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess my first answer to that is it's my hopes that those connections are so strong that that doesn't go away, you know, whether you're in the military or not. And, I have friends, brothers, right, that my kids call uncle, you know, and they've known them their entire lives. And so for me, I have that still, and some of them have gone away. But, that camaraderie we talked about earlier, like I know that there are my friends and brothers out there, right, that I could pick up a phone and call and say, "Hey, I need you to do this," and they would stop whatever they're doing and come help me. And so hopefully, they have developed relationships like that that they can rely on. the transition question is, yes, I think that they have gotten better DoD wide, but um, it's not where it needs to be in terms of the mental health and those intangible things, right? The majority of the transition programs that the DoD offers is, making sure that you know how to build, a resume and how to do your finances before you get out, and all those little checks in the blocks that you have to do administratively for the military to get out or retire. But they don't focus a lot on, finding your purpose and developing those, intangible things that you lose when you get out of the military. Which is why I actually just joined an organization which is called the Honor Foundation. Um, it's a nonprofit that is specifically designed for, special operations, but it's a transition program for them, and that was born because we saw the need for this gap that exists in helping individuals transition. And so part of that program is, the first phase is all about you, right? And so they walk them through, Gallup Strengths and Career Leader, and a lot of these other resources that are out there that helps them do a lot of self-reflection, helps them, reconnect with themselves, because 20 years doing the same thing, especially in the military, you tend to lose yourself a little bit. Uh, and so this transition program, it one helps them find their purpose or remember that, whatever that might be, in those connections. And then it also helps them with, the skills needed to be successful in the, civilian workforce. Um, and, the networking, understanding corporate culture, and all those different things. So I think that program is is a huge step in the right direction as far as transitioning. Hopefully, DoD wide realizes that and starts to invest in that as well.
And with that organization, is that a nationwide organization, or is it an organization just for North Carolina? And then how can people become a part of that?
Yeah, so it is nationwide, and growing as well. Um, and it is for the special operations community. But the organization has just developed something called Vector Accelerator, and that's for the larger service members, that they can also, benefit from the program that we've got going. But yeah, it's a nonprofit, obviously, so, you know, monetary donations and those things are always useful. But more so, we leverage a lot of coaches. And so each fellow is what we call them, each person that's coming through the program, we assign them a coach. And that's someone, we try and pair them with someone, if you say that you're interested in health and science or psychology, we try and find somebody with that background in that industry. But we give them each fellow a coach that can help them through this transition process. And so they, it's not just focus on industry. A lot of times they will start talking about PTSD and some of those other issues, but it's kind of having a mentor to help walk you through that. um, yeah, sorry, I got off on a tangent there. What
That's good.
was the question?
They can just go to the website to sign up for these services, or is that part of an outboarding process and board
Yeah,
like?
yeah. Sorry, that's where we're going with this. Yeah, so volunteering is another way that people can get involved with this organization, right? Like coaches, we do resume reviews. We do mock interviews to where it's kind of like speed dating for interviews, right?
Yeah,
We've got a bunch of, these industry professionals and the service members go around and they interview and get live feedback. So there's also that way to get connected and help to serve those who served us. And the website's honor.org, so honor.org. And you can see, all the different ways that you can get involved.
perfect, perfect. So yeah, make sure you check that out if that sounds like something you'd be interested in. Um, So you did 7 combat deployments. So what does it mean from a human nature perspective to go to combat and to do what you have to do in combat? Like, what have you learned about human nature from combat?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, perspective one, right? You know, when you get in that situation, your perspective on life and what's really important changes.
Yeah,
Uh, but there is, I mean, there, you know, obviously there's a lot of psychology and, you know, how that affects, you know, the mind and everything else. But one thing I found very interesting was, you know, how you have to almost become emotionally hardened in those situations, right? You know, you witness some atrocities that happen, you know, your friends dying and, you know, just all the gore and tragedy of war, right? But you don't have time to properly grieve. You don't have time to think about any of that stuff in the moment. You just have to, you know, continue doing to survive and to accomplish the mission. And so there is a natural defense mechanism, right, that you build up that allows you to suppress those things and bottle them up because you have to keep on, um, you know, keep on with the mission. But the problem that most of us have is, you know, stopping that when we come home, right?
yeah,
Like, you know, and that's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, you really understand the value of life, you know, and you gain an appreciation for life and the things that are in your life. You know, especially you go to some of these third world countries and you see, you know, kids that are, you know, living in poverty, you know, and you hand them a soccer ball, which is, you know, a few bucks to us, but it means the world to them, you know, and to watch them run off and play and, you know, do something like that for the first time, you know, it really changes your perspective on humanity.
yeah. It really does. Like, that's the interesting dichotomy about combat is you go over there um, to seek out and destroy the enemy, right? But in that process, you develop a different sense of humanity for the other as well, right? That's one of the biggest things that I took away from the combat tour that I did was that these guys are just like us. Like, they have their families. They're trying to do what's best. They were raised a certain way that's different than the American way, but I could easily put myself in their shoes and be like, I could see myself doing what they're doing to survive because, yeah, it is a survival for them. So, yeah, you are going over there with this idea of you're trying to kill the enemy, but you come back with this idea that, like, man, like, human beings are human beings no matter what. Even if they are the enemy, they are human beings, and that can make it very difficult as well, right? If you have that perspective and you're on a mission and casualties happen, either within your team or even in civilians outside of your team, even when you kill the bad guy, right? Because, like, in their eyes, we're the bad guy as well. That's the way that I framed it. Is like, we think we're doing the right thing. We think we're the good guys, but they also think that they're the good guys as
Yeah.
well, right? So
Yeah.
we could easily be in their shoes if we were raised in that environment. So it made
Yeah.
it very difficult to make them the bad guys sometimes too. Never made
Mhm.
it difficult to carry out the mission because the mission in my mind was to protect the people that we were with first and foremost. So that was do whatever that took. Um, but there are a lot of people, and we do hear about war crimes all the time where they take that too far. They dehumanize the person so much that they do commit these atrocious acts. And sometimes we say, like, that's just the business of war. These things happen. But yeah, it changed my perspective from the humanity side of things of, like, there's
Yeah.
I don't think there is And it's tough to say because you think about like World War II and you're like, there's evil out there. There are evil people. But I think those are like such the minority that this whole good versus evil nature of war, I just don't think that that like truly exists for the most part. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean that is such an awesome discussion we can have, man. Because there's ethics and morals and sociology and
Mhm.
all kind of things that are involved in that. But you're right. It- But just talking about humans in general, war is something that has existed for all of humanity,
Yeah.
and so it's just something that we do, right? And you're right, though, they're just as human. They may believe in their cause just as much as we do, and who is the person that says that's right or wrong on either side? Who knows, right? But um, the other side of that is you can also see, what humans are capable of. The bad things that humans are capable of, and so yeah, I don't. I mean, it's so interesting
Yeah.
that whole conversation that we can have.
Why do you think war is such a part of human nature?
I mean, it's one person's will against the other. Like I think early on it was out of survivability. You
Hmm.
know, one person had the resources that we needed to survive, and so that's what we went after. And then eventually it got to a point where it wasn't so much survival as it was, um, you know, ego at that point, right? You get to the warlord era of leadership, and it's about who manages the resources, and so it's always about resources for the most part. As humans to meet those needs, but once you have those met, then I think it just becomes a battle of wills and ideology at that point.
Yeah, because I always think like, yeah, I agree with you that that war started out with the idea that these people have what we don't have, or these people believe what we don't believe. So therefore, we're gonna go take it. But like, why didn't we just say, like, instead of taking it, like, why don't we just work with them to cultivate like a shared community instead of just taking it? Like, why do we have this scarcity mindset that the only way to get what is ours is to take it instead of work together to grow something, and that's something that always perplexes me as far as human beings go and human nature, is that dynamic of like scarcity mindset. We're going to take what's ours, and not like there's plenty to go around. Let's see if we can work together.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think it goes back to the individualization. People have the need to survive, and if they think they don't have what they need to survive, it's like the dog in the corner, right? He's eventually going to lash out if he feels that threatened. And I think that's where that kind of is probably deep seated. But you still see it surface now. Even you have a natural disaster, or a storm comes through here. We saw not long ago, right? And everyone just runs out and gets toilet paper. And we have the mass toilet paper issue, right? But there is that scarcity mindset of, man, I need to have these resources, because if they're not available to me in the future, then that affects my survivability.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting because
Mm.
I wonder if they have that same mindset in like Eastern cultures, like Japan, where they're more of a community based culture as opposed to an individualistic one. When they get met with natural disasters, is there a shortage of toilet paper in Japan as well? I often wonder that the whole like, I got to get what's mine, I got to feed my family, as opposed to thinking about like, huh, if we share with that family and they share with us, we're gonna be far better off. But yeah, I guess we don't think about that. But I also think that a lot of war and that type of stuff, evil, starts through envy and resentment as well, right? If you think about World War II and Hitler and the Nazi regime, that was built off of and cultivated off of resentment towards the Jews and towards the people that mistreated Germany in World War One. And even from an individual perspective, a human being that felt slighted because he didn't get into art college. He felt slighted because a Jew saved his life in World War One, and um, so that resentment just built and built. And I feel like resentment and envy are like the brother to evil. And then that's when evil comes into play. And it's like these people have what we don't have. Not only do they have what we don't have, but they've also suppressed us to where now we feel like we're never going to get it, even though maybe suppression never really happened, right? But because the
Yeah.
Jews were in charge of the money, the banks, everything, they felt like the Germans are getting left behind, so therefore they're no longer able to do those type of things, right? So I feel
Yeah.
like the same thing with the Taliban and the way they looked at the West as these evil, they like built this resentment. And I feel like that's where a lot of it comes from, is resentment towards others as opposed to finding those commonalities and thinking about that. Is there, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that. But I think that resentment still is traced back to, an effect on my need, my human need in some aspect. It's funny you mentioned. I've asked some, Taliban people why they fight us. And, a lot of them said because you're here.
Yeah.
And so it's a sense of like, you're on my land, right? I'm sure, the Native Americans here were the same way, like this was my resource that I had, and now you're here threatening to take it away, right? And so that's where, after so long, there is a resentment in this ideology that builds up that, hey, I don't like these people because they're a risk to my survivability.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that people are born evil? Do you think that they become evil over time? What do you think about that human
Mm.
nature argument?
Oh man, I like to be an optimist and see that everybody's good, but I'm also a realist and know that there's some awful people in the world. Um, but I think it all stems from hurt. I think
Mhm.
everyone is probably born good in the human sense, right? Like, we're all a clean slate initially. Obviously, there's some genetic issues and stuff that happen, right? Psychopaths and those types of things. Um, but I think, when people start becoming evil, right, is out of hurt. And you think about cartoons and like all these movie villains and all these things, right? Like generally they have a backstory that started with something that went wrong in their lives that caused that anger and hurt, to lead them down that path. And so I like to think that people are inherently good, however you define that, right? But the evil surfaces out of hurt, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree to a large extent, right? If you think about 9/11 and the war that started because of that, that all started from the initial invasion um into the Gulf War, right? And probably if you look back, there's probably other things that started, but it does come from that idea of like, if we go to a different country, like for instance, when we're in Iraq and we're doing our missions and we have to go out for 7 to 10 days to do a mission, we go to someone's house, we kick them out of their house. We're like, we're taking over your house. We got to run. So they have to pack up their stuff. They have to walk to their next family. So the Taliban sees that. So then they automatically become an enemy of the Taliban. We put them in that situation. So then someone in their family could get killed from the Taliban because we put them in that situation. Then those kids who lost their parents can see us as the evil ones that put them in that like. So yeah, it does always seem to, if you look back in there, there's something that somebody did to them and their family that caused this amount of hurt to
Hmm.
where they're going to be like, I'm going to take care, like when I get older, my whole entire life is going to be dedicated to dissolving this hurt that I had. So yeah, that, I mean, I think you're right on that aspect of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they killed my dad, and so now I've got to, avenge his death. And it's funny too, like, even why did we go into Iraq and Afghanistan in the first place in response to 9/11? And really, it comes back to that resources and protecting the homeland, right? Like, we felt attacked, and threatened, or a threat to our homeland, and thus we reacted to protect that, you know. And so and then it's just a repetitive cycle, right? Like,
Yeah.
once you get into war, then all those little microcosms of events that happen, just it's a perpetual cycle of hurt and all the other stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Even from our point of view, right? Like 9/11 happened, Americans died. We felt hurt by that. We go over there, we fight, we lose one person in our team. So now we're angry, and then we get ready for the next deployment, and we're going to be like, yeah, we're going to get those people that got us. And
Mhm.
yeah, it is this negative feedback loop that just never seems like it's going to end, because wars never end. And it is a resource thing that puts, like a resource thing from the top that puts everyone else in these positions of having to fight and constantly fall into that cycle of hurt revenge, and you don't really
Mhm.
have a, like you don't really have a choice in the matter.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the way that I approached it, we were talking earlier about, you know taking someone else's life, if you had to, is on either side, right? I approached it as, it's either I'm going home to my family or he's going home to his,
You have to.
right? And so they're back to that element of survivability, but also knowing, the humanity in that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
tough.
it is interesting, right? Like there is a right way to do war and a wrong way to do war. And when you say that out loud, it's like crazy, right?
Yeah.
But then there are some people that are like, there's no wrong way. Like, kill or be killed. I mean, when as a whole, the military, when we first invaded Iraq and Fallujah, it was pretty much like no holds bar. There was no rules of engagement. If there was somebody on the streets, they were the enemy. You could shoot them, right? And then when I was there in 2006, there was a lot more rules of engagement, right? And then as we were leaving, it was like, now we have to win the hearts and minds. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, we just, the first 2 years we were killing everyone, and now we got to be like, our bad. Like, we're gonna fix the situation now. And that was
Yeah.
like 20 years of that, and it ended in just complete and utter disaster.
Yeah.
Um,
And there was an element, I think, memories can be deceiving sometimes too. And I thought the same thing initially, but you see it now with, Israel and some of these other ones. It's not just a free for all. Even in early Iraq, right? Like, they would go into these known, terrorist villages, but they
mhm.
would do call outs, right? Like, hey, we're giving you 24 hours
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
get your stuff and get out of here. And if you are still here, we see you as an enemy fighter, And so I guess I'm careful in, articulating that. I don't think it was, we all just went in there and sprayed and prayed to anybody that was there, you know.
That's true. But think about it in terms of, like, if they came to America and they were like, you guys have 24 hours to evacuate your homes.
Oh yeah.
You know how many Americans would be like, I'm fighting to the death,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a wild thing, man. It's a wild thing. How did you mentally, um Was it purely, I need to get back to my family, so I'm able to compartmentalize Eric in combat versus Eric when I get home? Like, how did you compartmentalize? How did you emotionally deal with going to combat, then coming back home to your family?
Yeah, it's a switch leaving, right? I love, I forget the name of it. You see it in the Japanese culture, the big, it's almost like the lattice work, what is it? Like the trellis type thing that the samurais walk through,
Mhm.
you know, as they walk through them, that was, they had that realization that I may never see my family again. Like that was their dividing line of I'm going to war and that's all I'm focused on right now. And I think it's very similar, right? Obviously, you say your sad goodbyes and all that, and they're always with you, right? You're always thinking, but when you go, I have to focus on this one thing, which is coming home, and all else, everything else doesn't matter at that point. And so you have to go in with that sense of, I might not come back, but I'm going to do everything in my power to come back. Yeah. And I think most of us that join now, especially during the wartime, like we had that, we accepted it as a possibility, and every one of my deployments, I knew it was a possibility, but you willingly do it, and
Yeah.
there's coming back is the hard part of turning that off,
Yeah. How do
you
you
know,
turn it
all
off?
yeah, all the reasons that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
That's a lot easier said than done. But yeah.
Has there ever been a point in time where your wife was like, Eric, you're still in combat mode, like you need to flip the switch? Like how long did it take you to decompress, to feel normal again? If you'll never feel normal again, but how long did it take you to feel like you were yourself? You could be the loving, compassionate dad, husband, team leader. Like how long did that take? What was that process like?
Oh, consciously, I mean, the reunions are amazing, right? It's such a roller coaster ride. You're
Yeah.
so sad you miss them so much, and then the reunion is such an amazing thing. Um, and then there is a period of time, probably a month, two, I don't, whatever that is for whatever family, of getting back into the swing of things. You're re-injecting yourself back into the life that your spouse and kids had to adjust to, and so. Um, for me, I always felt things were normal. I knew that my wife was doing certain things that I normally do or whatever, and so transferring those responsibilities back and getting used to, she doesn't have to do everything. She has me here, because they do become very independent out of their own survivability. Um, that's the surface level things, right? But all those other impacts of PTSD and depression and all those things. Like, I mean, it took, even to this day, like I still have to consciously say, "Hey, be present in this moment right now." I think a lot of us need to do that.
Mhm.
Uh, but I mean, for years of shedding those things that have happened and those experiences and, you know, scars, physical and, invisible scars, mental scars. Um, yeah, it's just, it depends on the person, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, the hardest thing for me when I deployed was, my daughter was very young, and then I deployed like very young. She was probably like maybe 4 or 5 months old. And when I
Hmm.
got back, she didn't know who I was. So then you're like, you get back and you're very excited to see your family, and your daughter's like, I don't really know you. Like, I'm
Yeah.
scared. And you're
Yeah.
already emotionally distraught because you had to go to combat. You had to put that face on. And now you come back and you're being rejected by someone that is doing what's natural. They're a stranger, you know. Ho-
Yeah.
did you have any struggles with that, like reintegrating with your family and them getting to know you as Eric the person, not Eric the military guy?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, good job or bad job, I don't know how you define it, but I separated the two a lot. And so, you know, my family doesn't even know a whole lot about it. I mean, obviously they knew that I was in the military and, I deployed and things like that, but, they didn't know all the details and the ins and outs. And so I separated that a lot. Um, but it was a big struggle, which is one of the reasons I love the job, but I decided to retire because I eventually realized, I have spent probably half of my kids' lives away from them, you know, and so it affects your relationship with them. And obviously, I want to have a good relationship with my kids, and so I just had to prioritize, that, over continuing on beyond, which is another whole thing in itself. Is like you have to, the types of people that we are is, you build those relationships and you don't want to let those people down, and hey, I tell people I'm retiring and they're like, oh, you quitter, like, but
Yeah.
you feel like a quitter. You feel like you're letting them down, but and so you got to prioritize, and no one can ever say that you didn't do your part, and that's what I had to convince myself is like, yes, it's my time to hang this up because my family is more important than any of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're with your team and you're giving them everything you have, you don't want to disappoint them. And while you're doing that, you're probably disappointing your family. Like you can't be everything for everyone all at once.
Yeah.
And the fact that you had to develop your team because your ultimate priority was to stay alive and come home. And the only way to do that is to fully engulf yourself into team development and building that camaraderie. But at the same time, you're distancing yourself from your family every deployment.
Yeah, but it goes back to, everything we've talked about so far, the leadership, the purpose, the humanity, right? Like it's, I'm doing this, I'm, willingly putting my life on the line and doing all these things. My family is sacrificing,
Yeah.
relationships, time with me, all this stuff. But that's how I put food on the table for them. That's how I protect them, and so you look at those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like by doing what I'm doing now, which maybe this is just how I justified it throughout all my years, but like that's how I meet those needs for your family.
Yeah. I think that's one thing I think about a lot is like we as human beings are very good rational creatures. We rationalize everything the best, right? And I also often ask myself like, am I rationalizing to make me look like the winner all the time? And I need to take a step back and be like, are these rationalizations like accurate? I got to do that a lot because it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
very easy to justify and rationalize the decisions you make for the greater good, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I
That,
often have to pull myself back and be like, you're being an asshole right now. Like you're just winning even though you shouldn't be winning. Like quit doing
yeah,
this type of stuff.
yeah. But that comes back to that self-reflection and awareness, man.
Yeah.
I live in my head. I do.
Yeah, me too.
It's good and bad, right? Like, but you should be able to, why, I yelled at my kids the other day, not a proud dad moment, but like, afterwards I'm like, man, why did I do that? Was I really mad at him for what he did, or was I just stressed out with all the other things going on? Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, we can talk ourselves into anything.
Yeah, yeah. You have to be careful, very, very careful about that.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens in the military a lot is high rates of divorce,
Hmm.
and it's even more prevalent in special forces. You and your wife have been together for the entire 20 years. You guys uh, got together in high school. I believe it was senior year. So you guys have been together for 20 plus years. You have a whole football team of kids, you know. Um, how did you guys make it work when all the odds were against you? I'm sure your wife is probably the reason why it's worked.
Yeah.
Give her all the credit probably in the world. Um,
Yes.
because I think one of the hardest things to do is to leave your family and then they become independent of you, and it's up to her to let you back in. You don't you don't deserve the right to be in. They have to let you back in. So that means they have to unhinge their entire independence to let you back in. And that takes a very, very strong woman to do
Mm.
that. So how did
Yeah.
you guys make it work for 20 plus years when the odds, like what do you think is the key to a successful relationship in the military?
Oh God. I mean, I'm the wrong person to give that advice. No. I mean, I do give all the credit to her, man. I don't know how she's put up with me for so long.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like it, I mean, the spouses are the unsung heroes, man. They truly are, and I, I talked about it a little bit in my little retirement speech or whatever to her, but, in in that instance, at my retirement, I didn't want really, honestly, I didn't care about the, ceremony or anything like that. Like I wanted to use it as a way to honor her for all of the stuff that she had done throughout the years because they don't get awards, right?
Right.
You know, although they should. Um, but there's probably so many things that I don't even know that she had to deal with, while I was gone. Um, but it's work, it's communication, right? And just a choice, honestly. It always comes down to the choice. Is like, hey, this is the person that I chose to be with. Um, how do we make this work? And for both of us, family is a huge thing. We both came from broken families, and so that was something that we never wanted our children to have to experience. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely tough at times.
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I say we weren't on the brink of divorce, at certain points. But, we love each other very much, and our children, our family, we love. And it's a choice that, you have to make of, am I willing to make these changes to make this work? You know, and you grow together. That's, you have to grow together.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think choice is like the most important part when it comes to a successful relationship. Like just like we talked about earlier, where like you have to earn every day you wake up, you have to earn the respect of everyone. Every day you wake up, you have to earn the love of the person. And that requires a lot of self sacrifice and requires a desire to want to change for that person. But it always comes down to like a choice
Hmm.
first, right? And I think that's one of the most powerful things to a successful relationship is understanding that like it is a choice that you have to make every day, and it's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be this like romantic love that never faces any bumps in the road or anything like that, right? Like get rid of the Disney picture of what love is, right?
Hmm.
It's supposed to be hard work. You're going to constantly think like, man, is it supposed to be this hard? Should it be more natural? Like, shouldn't we just be in love and like we shouldn't have to work this hard? Why do we argue? There's other people that don't argue and they're full of shit. They argue all the time too, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but yeah, every day it's a choice you have to make to be with the person that you love. And I think in the military, it's very easy to not choose that because you do have your family, you do have your brothers to fall back on. And that's a different kind of love, but I can see why it's very easy to choose that. And then I can see why the spouse always feels like they're not being chosen And
Hmm.
I think that creates a lot of the internal like tension of why relationships don't last. And you have
Yeah.
to have somebody, especially on your side, a spouse that is incredibly understanding of that dynamic of like, yeah, he's not choosing them over us, he's
Hmm.
choosing life so he can be with us.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I've heard Jocko talk about it a handful of times with his wife, and it was very very similar dynamics of like that she was the backbone, and if it wasn't for her choosing to be okay with being not the top priority so that you can come home to be alive, to do all that stuff. Like that's the choice she made. And now
Hmm.
you choose to honor that. And that's like you said, that's one of the things that you wanted to do was honor her and honor that commitment. But I
Hmm.
think that ability to choose that commitment is the most important thing when it comes to a relationship, especially now when there are so many other options available with the click of your phone to always
Yeah.
think like, oh, things
Hmm.
could be just so much better. It's like, no,
Yeah.
they can't. Like you're
Yeah.
you're 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 fucked up. Like you have all kinds of problems. Trust me, things
Oh yeah.
aren't gonna get better. You
Yeah.
gotta work it out.
No, you're right, man. It comes to, it is, I think the two words that I would describe it as choice and commitment, you know. Yeah, because once all those, like you said, Disney feelings fade away, and they will eventually, it is a commitment. Like you have to choose to honor that commitment that you made. Um, and the other thing I think too is friendship. Like you have to be friends, because there is a time when it shouldn't ever disappear. The romance, right? You should always invest in that. But, you have to be friends with that person because when you're like 70 years old and you're sitting across and looking at this person in a rocking chair, all your kids are gone and it's just you two. You want to be able to hang out with them and not be miserable,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
so, you have to develop a friendship as well.
Yeah, you gotta do cool shit together. You gotta form memories. You gotta, yeah, treat her like she's one of your best friends that you're excited to hang out with?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what as you got out, as you contemplated your 20-year career, what are some of the things that you learned from special forces and being in special forces?
Hmm. Hard work and dedication will take you most places you want to go. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And the second immediately after that is, um, you've got to prioritize and what's important to you. You know, in the military, especially, and just in life in general, the world will take as much of you as you're willing to give. And so, if you don't prioritize those things that are important to you, whatever they may be, for me, it's family. Obviously, the world, the military, they're going to take and take and take. That's just the nature of what it is. And so, you have to have those. You have to have that clarity yourself first, and then you have to be able to set those boundaries. But
Yeah.
yeah.
No, especially the work part too. Because the attrition rate for special forces is 80-85% dropout. They don't make it. So you learn to work really hard. You learn to overcome very tough physical and mental challenges. Um, why do you think some guys take those intangibles and run with it and be successful out of the military? And why do you think some people um, don't? There's a lot of people that get out and they don't take that discipline, that work ethic with them. They leave it behind. Do you think it's like a mental health thing that they just can't overcome, or do you think it's an actual like rebellion of what they just went through? Why do you think people aren't successful out of that?
Yeah, I would say generally, right, in the soft community, you have guys that are successful, right? And all goes back to mentality. Another thing that I learned in the military with some of the stuff that I've been put through is like your mind will get you through just about anything. There are so many times when I thought I can't do another push up, or I can't run another mile with all this weight on my back, but like that mental toughness to say, no, you will do this. Like your mind will tell your body to do some incredible things that you never thought would be possible, and so that mindset that most guys have in soft that get them through all of those things, that push them to mission accomplishment no matter what. I'm dedicated to this and I'm going to see it through. Those are the traits and qualities that I think lead them to success afterwards. And that's not to say that there's not those out there that do struggle when they get out. Big reason why the Honor Foundation exists itself is to help those people transition to be successful. But I do think sometimes it is guys just they hated their time in being told what to do, when to wake up. You have to get a haircut and shave every single day. And so maybe for them personally, they just value freedom, and when they get out, they don't want anything that resembles that. So maybe it is a little bit of rebellion. But I think it all goes back to mentality. You know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one last thing. So for the longest time, the special forces community was very like secretive, and they didn't really talk a lot about what was going on. And now, um, one of the first people, Jocko, that wrote a book and shared their experiences. Now you get more and more people writing books about their military experience. Do you think that's a positive thing? Do you think that's a negative thing? What do you think about that sharing of military experiences?
It's good and bad. It's bad in the sense of if it jeopardizes security, obviously, right? Like secrets are secrets for a reason. Um, I think the sharing the experiences is extremely valuable. The military is obviously a test bed for a lot of things, that eventually come over to the civilian world. A lot of technologies, even, principle leadership is a huge one. Like we talked about earlier, Simon Sinek and servant leadership, like that's bled into, corporate society nowadays. Um, and so I think if they're writing it, intent is the other thing, right? So if they are writing it with the intent to share their experiences that others can positively benefit from it, then I think it's an amazing thing. Now, if they're writing it like you see a lot of some people doing nowadays in self-interest, hey, how do I get my next movie deal, right? Or how do I, whatever that is, then obviously that's self-serving and not beneficial to anybody really but that person.
Yeah, because I see this a lot now with like the whistleblower type people. So they'll go on these special ops shows and they'll talk about, intelligence stuff. And the the thing that comes to mind is the Green Beret who uh, just died in Vegas with the Tesla truck, right? And like as 2 days later, there was a podcast about that situation and how it was could be a potential psyop, could be like all these potential things. And it does
Yeah.
seem a lot of times like people are trying to become famous by exploiting the military, as opposed to, I think, the guys like Jocko who are trying to give experiences of how to become better human beings through their military experiences. So
Mhm.
I think you can clearly see the ones that are trying a little too hard to be cool, you know?
Yeah. And it goes back to ego too,
Yeah.
like I don't need to get on any podcast or anything and tell you all the cool things that I did, because I know what I did, and unless it has some value to you, like what's the point of sharing it? You know, I don't know. I don't have anything to prove to anybody anymore at this point in my life, and
Yeah.
so you know, I don't know. I think there's definitely some ego involved in that.
Yeah. I often wonder if they think that they're actually doing the right thing or if they think that they only care about like bottom line, trying to get as many views as possible type of situation. Obviously, you never know. the intent of other people, their true intents. I think with time, and I think with time you can figure out people's true intents, because
Yeah.
time reveals everything. That's why long conversations are great, because somebody's going to slip up eventually if their intentions aren't true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is something that I scratch my head about a lot nowadays with that type of stuff coming out. Um,
Yeah. And there's a lot of it, man. And you just, and from a business sense, yes, it is a very marketable thing, right? Because you see this group of individuals who are highly trained, and they do have some amazing experiences that no one else does. And so those people out there, they can learn from you, and so it's highly marketable from a business perspective. Like, even in my business, I mentioned the fact that I was in special operations. I try not to go overboard with it, and be the cool guy, right? But it is something that people value and seek out. And so I think from a business perspective, you know, having that background and saying, yes, here's where I'm coming from, my experience isn't a bad thing. Just like a doctor, like I'm from a medical profession background, like this is my background. Now, when it's a story of me with, long hair and a beard with my sunglasses and cool guy stuff on the front of the cover, I think that's a little bit different, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very different. And then speaking of books, you recently wrote a book, and it came out about a month and a half ago. Um, what exactly? Can you give a little bit of details of what that book covers, and how can people purchase that book if they're interested?
Yeah, so I've done a couple now, and they've been collaborative books. So I didn't write it by myself. I had a chapter in this book. The most recent one was titled "Life Changing Leadership," and that was a collaboration between myself and a bunch of other military leaders, and we basically all told a story about how an event or a series of events changed our perspective on leadership. And so my chapter in there was really about my family, and I think I learned more about being a leader from being a dad than I did in any of my combat experiences, and it goes back to that theory that I've been working on. And, democratizing leadership it's just a human thing, right? Because you look at, my wife, for example, she led our family for the last 20 years, and so that's leadership, right? Like she's inspiring action and all these other things to a common goal, the success of our family, right? And so, I talk a little bit about the inherent leadership theory in that book briefly, um, and just, I hope readers can see, how important family is to me in that, and how it shaped my perspective on leadership. But yeah, that's one. You can get it on Amazon. It's Kindle now,
What's the name of it?
or it's called Life Changing Leadership.
Okay.
But yeah, there's paperback option. But writing is something I love. I used to write poetry when we were in high school and stuff, and I forgot about that. I did it sporadically throughout. I'd write Steph Little love poems or something, but that's something that I recently rediscovered a passion of mine. And so I'm actually working on another book right now. It's a like a fantasy novel, and it's funny. It's my inner nerd in me, right? But
Yeah, that's awesome.
man, I tell you though, I have just enjoyed the process of writing, and being creative has always been something I value. And so it's really cool to get back into something that you're passionate about but forgot about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think the exploration of like that creative side of somebody that comes from our background is really important, right? Like when you value intellect and learning, you have a tendency to subdue the creative side for the intellect. But finding that balance, like you look back and you got guys like Einstein and Richard Feynman, and these guys loved like poetry and art and that type of stuff. So I think having that creative expression Um, one is great for everyone, but two, I think it also allows you to um, develop a story and help with like mental health as well, right? Because you're able
That's
to tap into things from a story format that, if it wasn't in a story format, could be very hurtful and dangerous. But the fact that you are creating this world, this poem, this whatever, allows you to do it in a way that gives you the ability to express yourself when you feel like a lot of times you're not able to do that. So having tapping into that creativity does allow for beautiful expression of very difficult things. So that's
Yeah,
awesome
and
that you found that.
it's been extremely therapeutic for me, to be honest with you. And
Yeah.
I'm sure like your field of study. Um, You've probably known me longer than anyone, man, and you know that I've always been kind of a nerd, anyways.
Hmm.
I've always loved the arts. I've always been in band, and I used to want to be a cartoonist, and I read every dinosaur book. I still watch documentaries every single night, which drives my wife crazy. But eventually, when we got in high school, when we were both playing sports, like we got in, and that we were kind of that jock click, and like there's a certain expectation of you as you're this tough jock, cool guy, and then it went further in the military, right? Like I was in recon and in special operations, and there's this like tough guy machismo culture, and like that's what I was for so long. And so getting back to kind of rediscovering my inner nerd, those things that I am passionate about, art and drawing and music and writing and all of those things. It's a rediscovery process that's been very therapeutic for me. And they actually do. I went through another program called Intrepid Spirit here on base, and that's for people who've suffered traumatic brain injuries. But they do offer music therapy and
Mm.
art therapy, and I know that that there's a lot of science behind those things. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. Love that. Well, that's it for the interview, man. Just want to say, first off, thanks for your service.
Yeah,
Uh,
yours too, bud.
yeah, yeah. 20 years is incredible. And then, as always, thanks for your friendship and, you know, very, very lucky to have you in my life and have you as a friend, man.
Yeah, I feel the same. An honor to do this with you, man.
Yeah. Appreciate your time, buddy.
All right, brother.